everyone, this is Tara with the Painted Cicada. Welcome to Rainbow Winter. We are painting with watercolor today, and funny enough, I woke up this morning and it was snowing, so I am totally in the snow watercolor mood. Thank you for coming, and I'll go over I need to stop stumbling over my words. I'll go over supplies briefly before we get started. If you're here with me live, feel free to say hello in the comments. If you're watching on the replay, hello, you are so welcome to be here. All right, so if you made it here, when you signed up, you got this supply list with the video links. So I'm just going to briefly go over supplies. For the most part, it's really just watercolor paper, watercolor, and brushes. As far as watercolor paper goes, my favorite, my tried and true, is Canson XL. It's fairly expensive, but I believe it behaves similar to higher quality watercolor papers, and I love to use it. Watercolor paper is important. It will not work the same if you're trying to do this on copy paper or craft paper. Watercolor paper is made to move and blend. As far as watercolor goes, today I'm going to be using Dr. P.H. Martin's watercolors, and I've got red, yellow, and blue. You can use any shades. I'm just going to be mixing colors, and then I've got black, and the black is for the trees silhouettes. And then from these three colors, I was playing before we started today. From these three colors, I have mixed up the secondary colors, orange, green, and purple. So orange is just red and yellow, heavy on the yellow. Green is yellow and blue, again, heavy on the yellow. And then purple is just red and blue. And so I've got my colors prepared. If you're not using liquid watercolor, no worries. I often like to use these watercolors from Art Philosophy called Prima. And these are the classic colors. And so this simple set gives me every color I need to create today. And then, you know, if I just wanted to mix up my secondary colors, I could do that as well. So you can use any watercolor that you have. Watercolor is fine as well, but I like to get it prepared and on my palette. Okay, and then you're going to want water, paper towels, somewhere to put your paint. A heat gun or hair dryer is handy. We're using lots of water today. With this, I did give a tracer. Tracer and carbon paper is totally optional. I'm going to kind of sketch this along with you. We're going to create it as we go, but if you are more comfortable using that tracer, feel free to do so. If you want to do that now and you haven't yet transferred it, you can pause this and you can do it and then resume. And then another optional option is a white paint pen. And what I did on my original was just come back through and add a little snow on the trees and on the branches. So again, totally optional, but kind of fun. So those are the supplies. And then here are two of my samples. So this was my original. This was another original I had created and scanned a while back, and then I recreated it in some different colors. And before we begin, I also wanted to show you, I've been playing with this one just a little bit. So I've got some other versions, the exact same process that we're going to do today, but I just changed the composition. So know that you can take this and make it your own. But here is another sample, exact same process. I just added different trees. And here's another one. Again, exact same process. I just added different trees. So however you make yours is absolutely fine. Feel free to shake it up, make it your own. You can make, more than one as you're working, but creating this rainbow background is lots of fun. So I am confident that yours will turn out beautifully. Alrighty. So let's get started. I've got 2 watercolor papers today, and so I'm going to use one to create my piece, and the other we're going to walk through creating trees. They're fairly easy. So anyway, I've got my watercolor paper here. Make sure my camera's focused. My camera does not like it when I have a blank white sheet. If you want to kind of sketch out your composition, now is the time. I've just got a pencil and I'm going to go really lightly with this pencil. So the first thing that you want to do, I would say 1/3 of the way or 1/4 of the way up your page, you want to create just a very light horizon line. Your horizon line oftentimes is straight, but you can add just a little bumps to it. Maybe it's a little hilly. So choose where you want your horizon line to be. Then down at the bottom, we're going to create kind of some mounds of snow. And so again, the shape can vary, but I know for the most part, I'm going to have a large mound of snow that kind of comes across here and cuts my bottom in half. So I've got a line coming across here. Up at the top, I've got a little tree. So I'm going to have a little mound where that tree is. And I'm going light because in watercolor, we work with transparency. So I don't want my pencil lines to show. And then over on this side, I've got another little tree up here in the background. So maybe he gets a little snow around him. And then I've got in my composition 3 trees. So I'm just marking where they go. And I know that this tree is going to have a little snow mound, and then this tree also. So you can play with your composition a little bit. I know I'll have a tree here. And where your trees go, you're not really going to see because we're working in black watercolor. So I do like to mark those in. So you can draw in your trees. If you prefer not to do this, hi Tina, welcome. Good morning. I know it's still early out in California. Is it Tina or Tina? I said Tina. It probably is Tina. Sometimes I am not the smartest. Not the sharpest crayon in the box, or what's that saying? Not the sharpest tool in the shed. I don't know. I don't even have my sayings down. All right. So after you sketch your composition lightly, and you can even kind of work without doing so, what we're going to do is we're going to start creating this beautiful rainbow background. And so from our horizon line upward, we are going to wet the page. And when I say wet the page, I want it saturated, but I don't want it sopping. I don't want puddles of water on the top. So I'm going to use a large brush. You can use a round or a flat. Really, it doesn't matter at this point. And I am going to go right up to that horizon line, but I'm going to be careful not to go beyond it because the water will move wherever it is wet. And then I'm going to fully saturate the top of the page. So from about here on up, I'm going to create a nice smooth line, and then we are going going to add wetness. So the first part of this lesson, we're creating wet on wet, which creates a beautiful blend and a lot of movement. All right, I've probably overworked that a little bit, but my page is nice and saturated. If you have not yet, make sure all of your watercolors are wet and ready to use. If you're working from a palette, you can, you don't have to transfer them to a separate palette, but I've got mine ready to go. And the first thing that I'm going to do is get some water on my brush. And if you have not mixed up your secondary colors, go ahead and do that. So I mixed my red and my yellow to make orange. I mixed my blue and yellow to make green. And I mixed my my blue and red to make purple. So I've got all the colors I need. I'll kind of shake those out so you can see them on camera. I've got all the colors I need right here. But the first thing I'm going to do is add in my rainbows while this is nice and wet. And so I am going to gently get my brush wet and tap in this red. And the first thing in my original, I've kind of got a rainbow going across here. And I'm just going to tap in that red. Now, understand that as watercolor dries, they do lighten. So depending on how dark or vibrant you want your rainbow to be, and there's no right or wrong here. If you like a less vibrant painting, that's absolutely fine. But I'm going to do my primaries first. So I'm going to add red, and I'm just kind of tapping this in. Adding my yellow. And then adding my blue. And then once I have those primaries where I want them, I'm going to come back through again with a wet brush, tapping into those secondary colors and just adding hints of those secondary colors, kind of blending in. To that rainbow. And just play. Watercolor is all about playing. So in between the yellow and the blue, adding in hints of green. And then once I have a rainbow-like design, I can brighten up the color in certain places if I want to. But what I'm going to do now is just get some clean water, and I am going to add some water on the sides and let this rainbow blend out a little bit. We want to work with wetness on our page, so lots of blending, lots of movement, and I'm just kind of re-adding some of that water. All right, if your page is dried a little bit, you can add, more water. Be careful of your rainbow. Anytime you touch, a space that's wet with water, it's going to bleed. So bleeding is not necessarily bad at all. Bleeding can be really beautiful in this lesson. But if your paper has dried a little bit, you may want to Add a little more water. I actually like the bleeding, so I'm going to go ahead and touch that and let that blend out and do its thing. All right, and then what I'm going to do now, so I've got more wetness on this page. I'm going to choose one or two more areas and just add hints of rainbow colors. So I don't need to add full rainbows, right? We have our one full rainbow glare here. So what I'm going to do, maybe on this side, I'm going to start with my yellow, tap in a little yellow, maybe a little hint of green underneath that yellow. So just doing partial rainbows, right? So over here, a little yellow, a little green, a little blue. So just adding 3 colors and then some water around it so that blends out. Maybe down here at the bottom, I might start with the, maybe I'll start and just add a little blue, tap in a little purple, maybe even a little red, and then water around it. I didn't clean off my brush, so that's going to bleed out in those colors, and that's fine. I'm loving that. Maybe up here, just a little red, orange, and yellow. So you can add just, just little rainbow highlights here and there. Oops. I always get a hair on my watercolor paper. Always. Okay. So these are my rainbows. You can see they're fluid, they're playful, they're fun. There's no hard rule for these rainbows. Now all we're going to do is we're going to make sure we've still got wetness all over our page. And we are going to tap in some of that blue color to create our background. And so we're going to go fairly light. So get your brush nice and wet. I'm going to use a large round, and I want this to be lightly shaded. So I'm going to tap in some color and then move it around. And I do want to keep some white space. I want some lighter shades of blue. So I tap in my color, and then from here on out, I'm just going to kind of move it and blend it. And I'm going to make sure I'm not crossing that horizon line. White space is good, so don't feel like you have to cover everything in blue. Okay, we're getting different variations, different shades. This is going to end up looking, a little cloudy. So maybe there's more blue in some areas, maybe there's more clouds in others, but feel free to play and have fun. This is a really great wet on wet technique where it just, there's no hard rules. Okay, so add in your color wherever you want to, and let that water blend it out. And once you've got your hints of blue in the sky, if you want to, you can come back and add just, you know, tiny bits of other colors if you want, if you feel like you don't have enough of that rainbow in there. So for example, I can add just tones of purple into the blueness. Those mix rather nicely since purple is just right next to blue on the color wheel. And that just changes up, oops, that was really dark. That just changes up that sky area ever so slightly. I don't have a lot of purple down here in my rainbow, so I'm just going to tap in just a little, bring out that kind of violet that shows up at the bottom there. But remember, there is no right or wrong in how you make your rainbows. I'm going to show you again some of the other variations of this that I made. So my skies are very different. So this has very little blue and a lot of those beautiful colors. And you know, it looks more like a sunrise or a sunset. This one here, I've got the color, instead of my sky kind of moving sideways, this looks a little more like almost an aurora borealis. So you can really play with the placement of your color, and you can try this several different ways and see which one you like best. All right, so I'm just giving this a moment to dry slightly. My personal preference when working with watercolor is that I do get some, you know, dry lines. I get some bleeding, and I get some, you know, fun little marks, and I call them watercolor doodles. I like it when the watercolor makes its own doodles. So that is a method I prefer. So you'll see that in my pieces. What I'm going to do now is let this top dry just a little bit, and I'm going to focus on the snowy area at the bottom. And mostly I'm going to be using my blue, and I will get probably a medium round brush. I'm using all rounds for this. But again, there's no rules. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add water, and I'm going to follow the shape of this little mound I'm going to create under this tree. So I am going to add water first, and you will see what happens when I tap in the watercolor. It's going to kind of blend out into that wetness. So I added my water, and then I tapped in, I tapped in that color very lightly, and I'm just letting it blend out however it wants to. And over here in the background, this one is much smaller. So I need very, very little of that blue pigment. I'm just going to tap in a little mound of snow back there. All right, now I have kind of a snow mound that crosses across my painting. And For this one, again, I'm going to add just a line of water where I want this to go. And this one I am going to blend out a little bit. So first I'm wetting that water line. I'm going to come back through with a slightly larger brush since this is a bigger area, and I'm just going to extend that water line. So I'm working on a 9x12, and so I'm going to say, I know this is hard to see on camera, but my water line here is about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch. So I want this to blend downward a little bit. Let's see if you can see that wetness. So there's my water line all the way across. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to start tapping in this blue. And I'm going to go all the way across the top once again after I tap in my color, and I am going to create a nice strong break with this color here. Rinse off my brush so that it's all water. And then over here, I'm going to add water and let this blend down. And so we add water and we let the watercolor decide how far it's going to go. You can encourage it in some places more than others if you want to kind of pull down that blueness. It's totally up to you. If you're finding it's not bleeding down enough and you want more color, you can tap into your color, but you are going to want to add the color at the top. Once you add the color at the top, then encourage it downward. If you add the color at the bottom, it's going to be too bold. So add your color at the top and encourage it to move down. Just to make this a little more fun, I'm going to tap just into some blue and maybe just tap in some dots here and there. Some areas are wetter than others, so this might blend out a bit, but I'm going to add in some dots of blue, and then maybe I might even add in like a dot here or there of water. And when you do that, it just kind of pushes away some of that color. I like to create little areas of visual interest in the water. All right, so far with the bottom here, we created these two small mounds in the background. We've got this one large cross here. And then I know I'm going to have two trees that have some shadowing here in the front. So I'm going to do the exact same process as I did with this large snow mound there, and I'm gonna create a line up to my tree branch of water. You can kind of see where that glisten is right there. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tap in some color across the top. I'm going to come across the very top with blue, just to make that line very clear. And I actually really like that just as it is. I'm going to kind of let this one move out and blend on its own. And then we've got another tree here that I'm going to add. Oops, it was supposed to just be water, but you know, I didn't clean up my brush enough. But now you see where I'm putting my water, right? So here's that last one right here. Going to add that blue right across the top to make that line a little more distinct. And then letting that color blend out downward. And you get to decide how strong that shadow is, that blue underneath that tree. This one, since it's in the front, I might make it the most shadowed, the most blue. Thank you, Tina. Really, it's just I let the watercolor decide what it wants to be. I am a very fluid artist for the most part. I try to let the medium that I'm working with decide what it wants to be. It gives me a lot less stress. I don't like to try to be so set on my composition. So I kind of have, with those variations, I created the background, and then I added the trees based on what the background decided it wanted to be. So it's kind of fun. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is add in the silhouette of the trees. And in order to do that, your watercolor paper really should be completely dry. And so I don't do this often, but what I'm going to do today is I'm going to call a 5-minute break so that if you don't have a heat gun or hair dryer, you have time to let this watercolor dry. And then I'm going to dry mine with a heat gun. I actually have, I do a lot of alcohol ink, and this is great for alcohol ink. But this is a Revlon. It actually has some curling attachments to it, but this blows hot air. And so I'm going to dry mine with this, but I will put up a 5-minute break, and we will come back and we will add those silhouettes. Okay, everybody, I am back, and I hope that your watercolor is somewhat dry at this point. I am going to set mine aside for just a minute and talk about how I create my trees. So we will come back to this. I'm going to create a tree, and I'm going to work fairly large just so that you can get the concept how I feel like I make trees easily. So we're using black as our silhouette. You can practice along with me if you've got a spare watercolor page. But this is kind of my process for making trees. So the first thing I do is I'm going to start with the trunk of the tree. And I'll make my tree trunk there. And every time I add an arm, I thicken the trunk of this tree. So I thicken the base of that tree. And I go outward. And that gives me a nice proportional tree. And this kind of gets me started. Oops, kind of goofed up there. That's okay. And then when I come to do my branches, what I'm going to do is just like I added depth to the base of the tree for every limb I made, for every branch that I make, I'm going to add a little bit of thickness to the limb. So every time I go off this limb, I'm just going to add a little bit of depth here. And this helps me to keep my tree proportional as I come up and make these branches. All right, and then I'm going to add smaller branches, and every time I'm going to go back to the previous limb or branch and just add a little thickness. So I always want the previous branch to be thicker than what I've got on the ends. And I just very, very lightly, you'll see I didn't even change brushes. Once I get my ends where they want to be, I just add a few more small branches there. So I always just add a little thickness to the previous step so that my tree feels proportional. I just kind of work my way out. And today we're just creating a silhouette of a tree. So there's no right or wrong. Your tree can have as many or as few branches as you want, but that's the process that I do in creating these trees. So I start with the base, the trunk of the tree, and I work my way out, getting smaller and smaller as I work out. Okay, so back to my piece here. For the most part, I'm not going to dilute this black watercolor very much. I want a nice dark pigmented color. My trees for the most part are thin, so I am going to work with a fairly small brush here. This one is a size 4, so I would encourage you to use a size 4 or lower. I'm going to start with my smallest tree first, which I think is just going to be this little guy here in the background. Again, your composition can be totally different from mine, and that is fine. So I've got this little guy here, and every time I add another limb, I just add thickness to the original trunk. And I work very, very lightly, just using the tip of this brush. That's what I'm using to make my lines thinner. And so I've got some main branches here, and now I'm just going to come through and make some smaller ones. Always starting from the previous branch so it's a little thicker. So there's my littlest guy. Next, I'm going to create my second largest tree. So we're moving farther away up to the foreground. So my second largest tree is going to be right over here on this little snow mound. So I start with my trunk. And then little by little, I'm going to add to the trunk and create limbs. And then off of these limbs, I'm going to create smaller branches. Always starting by adding thickness to the branch previous. And your trees can be any shape you want. Oh no, it's blurry. It looks clear on my end. Sometimes when I put my arm in front of the camera, it does get a little blurry. I will try my best not to do that. So here are my two tiny trees. And I'm going to continue to work forward. And I'm just, for this, I'm following kind of the example of my sample there, but feel free to make your trees look however you would like. So my next largest tree is going to start right in about in the middle of my page here. And this one I definitely want larger than the other two, because as they get closer, they're going to be larger. So I add my main trunk line, and then I'm going to come through, and with every limb I add is just a little bit of thickness. And don't be afraid as you're working as well. If you need to turn your page, make it easy on you. There's no wrong way to get these lines on here. So as you make your branches, the only thing you really need to keep in mind is that branches get thinner every time they split off. So your trunk should be the thickest area of your tree, and then your limbs are the next thickest area. And as you get out to those small branches, they get thinner and thinner. So if you need to go back and adjust some of the smaller ones, feel free to do that. I find sometimes the key to a successful tree is just adding branches until you feel like it's finished, and then go back and add a few more. right, so now I'm moving on to my next tree, which is going to be even closer. And for this one, I'm going to first choose where my trunk goes. This is a very tall tree, so I'm going to have it go right off the top of the page. Down at the bottom, I am going to add just a little depth to the base there. That comes down into that snow. So for this one, since it goes off the page, and I know this is going to be one of my thickest two branches, I'm going to go ahead and add the thick shape of this in with my black first. So I know this is going to be thicker than my last tree because it's closer. So most of this is going to stay this same thickness, and right about halfway up the tree, I'm going to gradually thin it just slightly. But we're not going to see the very top of this tree, so we see mostly the trunk. All right, so this here is the start of our tree. And then again, I'm not going to add too much thickness. We already decided on the thickness when we made this trunk. But I am going to come through and start adding some limbs, keeping in mind that these are going to be nice and thick and go farther across the page than my previous tree limbs. And as we go up, these tree limbs get a little bit smaller. And it's just the same process, tree after tree. Just adding more and more smaller limbs. Ugh, every time I move my arm, my camera is not liking me today. All right, and then the same process for my last tree as this previous one. So this is going to be my largest, and it's kind of coming off this snow mound down here. And so I'm going to decide on the thickness. Again, like I said, I want it to be the largest, but I don't necessarily need to make it, you know, crazy jumbo. I can decide on the center of the tree here. And then we just build up that thickness. And you can see as we're adding in these final silhouettes, it's really starting to come together. These two larger trees, for the most part, stay fairly thick all the way off the page. So there is my trunk, and then we start adding some limbs. Of course, I'm going to add a few larger ones to begin with. And with this final tree here, we're going to add some branches over to the left. But on this final tree here, I really am thinking about the composition and where I need some more lines and busyness. So So I feel like I'm pretty happy with my final tree. You can see as you start layering them, the need to add more and more branches isn't as apparent because they all criss and cross and, do their very tree-like thing. And so the very last thing that I am going to do is I'm just going to add a few branches poking in from the left side. And again, depending on your composition, you can decide where you want them to go, but it's all going to be from the same tree. So I'm going to make a little cluster, and I'm going to start just kind of pulling some off to the edge. And again, making sure the farthest branches that we see are thinner, and they get thicker as they go off the page. And that is it, my friends. I'm happy with my composition, so I am going to finish up just by signing my name here at the bottom. Feel free to play with your composition. I can't wait to see how you have created your rainbow winter piece. And thank you so much for joining, everybody. I know I had quite a few people ask me if the replay was available, so I know some of you are going to be watching this on the replay. But I would absolutely love to see what you all create. If you have not yet, I welcome you to join the group, the Painted Cicadas Art and share your pieces with us. Here is the address. There's also a clickable link right on your supply list if you are interested. You can always just tag me at Painted Cicada on the socials, and that notifies me that you've tagged me and I can see your work as well. Thank you for taking a chance in painting with me today. I hope you enjoy this process. I hope you make so many more beautiful paintings with the same rainbow process. It's really fun and easy. And the more you do it, the easier the trees become. Lori asked, do you do a lot of watercolor tutorials? This is my first with you. I am a multimedia artist, and so I have trouble picking a lane, but usually I have one watercolor available every month. I also work in acrylics and mixed media and alcohol ink, so I do kind of switch it up. Also, for those who are interested, and I'll give a shout out to all of my supporters, I do have a membership on Facebook, and for $4.99 a month, you get all of my classes. Typically, I plan 3 or 4 or 5 a month, and they are all included for $4.99, and then supporters also get a bonus lesson included. I always work in a variety of media, so the cost for this supporter option is less than a single class, and so it's a great bargain if anybody is interested. And shout out to my supporters. It's you guys that make this all possible. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. Thank you, Tina and Lori, for hopping on and asking questions and commenting. And thank you so much. I will see you all again very soon. Don't forget to share your work with me. Have a great day, everybody.